Hello and welcome to MS102 Lesson 05, Squad Tactics Basic Patrolling. Now this is the third part of a three-part series on squad tactics. You should have already made it through basic components and basic movements before moving into this. So if you haven't yet, exit out of this video, go find the other two and get through those first. Otherwise, stay tuned here. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS at the University of Montana, and I will be leading you through this lesson. So to start with, I want you to think about this quote here. To secure ourselves lies in our own hands, but the opportunity to defeat the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Now, as we're thinking through this quote, I want you to think about how it applies in the context of squad tactics and basic patrolling, what you might already know about those things. What does it mean that to secure ourselves lies within ourselves, but the opportunity to defeat the enemy is provided by the enemy themselves? Then how might patrolling apply to the second half of that quote? How do we find those opportunities? Now we're going to do a lot of thinking through this lesson, so put your brain on zone in mode. Think through a lot of these questions. We're going to discuss them as we go. Very first thing I want you to think about, why is it critical that you actually understand basic patrolling? Why does this matter? And then while we're going through that, how do we mitigate the potential for enemy threat as we conduct our patrols? Now moving into our learning objectives, what we're going to do through this lesson is we're going to identify the two main types of patrols and their elements. We're also going to identify and talk through the 5 principles of patrolling. And then we're going to talk about employing our basic hand and arm signals with a few examples right out of your Ranger handbook. You may have different SOPs depending on your university, but for now, these are the basic ones that you would find. Of course, if your university has an SOP that looks different than what I'm going through, follow your university's typical standards, okay? All right, so I told you we were going to do a lot of thinking. Going back, why is it critical that you understand basic patrolling? Well, for survivability. These are basic principles that can be applied to everyday life, not just patrolling with your rubber duck and your assault pack on through the forest. You can actually implement a lot of this stuff into just your basic everyday life, right? Being on guard, understanding your surroundings, and how we move through different parts of our life on university campuses, at work, at home. You can actually employ a lot of these. Now, how do we mitigate the potential for enemy threat as we're conducting these patrols? Well, we adhere to what we call the principles of patrolling, which we'll go through. We're basically going to plan for the patrol just the way you plan for any operation. So there are specific things that you want to make sure that you're covering and thinking about before you go on any type of patrol or movement. So this question, what might you utilize a patrol for? What is it? It's not just walking through the woods from one point to the next. What do we actually utilize this for? Well, there's a lot that we use it for. We use it to gather information, maybe to regain contact with the enemy, maybe to engage the enemy. Maybe we're just patrolling to reassure the local population that we're here. Maybe it's to prevent public disorder or deter and disrupt insurgent or criminal activity. Maybe it's to provide unit security. Maybe it's just to protect essential infrastructure. There is a lot here that we can utilize our patrols for. Like I said, it's not just walking through the woods during lab on Wednesday afternoons or Thursday mornings or Saturdays whenever your university conducts your labs. This is what, Big Army actually utilizes what we call patrols for. Now our next question, how might a patrol be advantageous in a foreign environment? Don't overthink this one. It gets us intelligence, right? Going back to that gaining information. It allows our forces to contact and then defeat the enemy with our smallest possible element, This is what we call the economy of force, using your smallest possible element to defeat our enemies. Now, is it possible to conduct operations without patrols? And if so, what's the trade-off of that? Well, yeah, it's possible, but it would be the exception since it's not optimal. Trade-offs in general can result in either unnecessary casualties due to poor intelligence. So yes, you can conduct operations without patrols, but probably not your best idea. Now, is it prudent to structure every patrol for contact or combat? Yeah, absolutely. A lot of recon patrols actually end up receiving contact. There's no such thing as what some people will call a courtesy patrol that doesn't require at least some preparation for a contact contingency. Essentially, that just means there's no such thing as ever being able to go out on patrol without even the slimmest chance of receiving contact during that patrol. You have to plan for that. Now, there are two main types of patrols. We have reconnaissance patrols, or recon patrols, and then we have combat patrols. Each of these have their own types or subcategories within them. So for recon patrols, you'll see area recon, route recon, and zone recon, whereas combat patrols encompass raids, ambushes, and security patrols. Now, how do you know which teams to use in a given patrol? Well, our favorite answer. Depends on the conditions that you face, which we also call MET TCI, right? So it's really going to depend on the analysis of the area that you're in, terrain, weather, the troops that you have. Your situation is going to dictate which teams you use on any given patrol. And how does our mission influence what type of patrol is required? Again, it really just depends on the purpose of that mission. So now, why would patrolling require some sort of set of principles? Well, there is a reason for it. I want you to think through these for a second. Your principles of patrolling hit these 5 marks, right? There's planning, there's recon, security, control, and believe it or not, one of the principles of patrolling is just simple common sense. Now think of these more as a guideline as you're planning your patrol, as you're thinking through what type of patrol you're going to be on. These 5 marks need to be hit. So again, why would patrolling require a set of principles? Because they're vulnerable. They have to secure themselves. If we don't have some sort of standardized set of procedures, we put the mission in jeopardy, which means we could put our soldiers' safety in jeopardy. So governing the patrol and having control over it maximizes its potential and increases its safety. So it's a twofold reason why we have those principles. Now let's get into these principles. So for planning, the examples for this when we're thinking through it is just our initial planning considerations, maybe the coordination for our passage of our lines, how we are departing friendly lines, completing our plan, and then debriefing that. Those are different examples of that planning principle. And then as we move into reconnaissance, those examples are like a map recon, maybe a leader's recon, maybe an objective recon. As we're thinking through security, we're thinking about our security along the patrol route, at different halts, as we depart our friendly lines, as we re-enter our friendly lines. What things do we have in place for that patrol to make sure that we're keeping as secure as possible? Now for the control principle, these examples, really this happens throughout your entire patrol, but we're focusing on our departing and re-entry of our friendly lines, as well as our rally points. And if you've been through our basic battle drills or intro to battle drills lesson, you'll understand why those rally points play a part in all of this. Now, I didn't get to that last one because we're going to talk about it here. Why is common sense a principle? Why do you think? In my mind, common sense plays a role in absolutely everything. You have to use your common sense, your good judgment, right? One of those things that we evaluate you on. Use sound judgment in conducting your patrols. That needs to be applied to just about everything you do anyway, but we do consider this a principle of patrolling. All right, so we're gonna do kind of a recap, actually more of a review onto these different things here. We've got our types of patrols, right? Those are gonna be your reconnaissance and combat patrols, which are each broken down into their 3 different categories. So you have area, route, and zone recon patrols. And then you have raid, ambush, and security patrols that all fall under a combat patrol. All of these patrols need to follow 5 basic principles. And those are planning, reconnaissance, security, control, and common sense. So this was just a nice quick way to pull everything that you just watched in the first 20 slides right here into a basic flowchart. All right, so now moving into the next section of this, how do we control formations and individuals while we're on patrol? Well, we use hand and arm signals, right? I'm sure you've had a class on this. I'm sure you've seen some of these. You might even use some common sense to understand what some basic hand and arm signals are. But this is how we control the different formations and individuals while we're moving. Now, is it possible for other forms of communication to occur? Maybe. Why might hand and arm signals be used more often though? Well, other forms might be radio, pyro, or voice, but at the end of the day, hand and arm signals are simple, efficient, and when we say they give off less signature, we're talking like noise discipline, right? We're talking, light discipline. So pyro tends to obviously give off a lot of light and noise. Radio, if your university doesn't use the earbuds, or we have ones that actually plug into our radios, but we still have to speak into those, which means we're using our voice. So hand and arm signals, we really drill that into people that they're simple and efficient, and they're just the smarter way to control what you're doing. So talking about hand and arm signals, of course we have to plan and rehearse these. Why? Because we need to make sure that everybody actually understands what that signal means. There are a lot of them, so it is very important that your group, your element, team, squad, platoon, etc. actually is all on the same page, is following the same expectations, SOP maybe, and that you've rehearsed these so that when you see them, you immediately know what they mean. They can be used to do a lot of different things. They may be used to lift or shift supporting fire. Maybe you're using it to start an assault. Maybe you're using one to withdraw from an objective. Maybe to signal an all clear, or even stop and start movement of patrols. But again, they have to be known by all patrol members. Everybody has to know what's being communicated. So how do you ensure that? How do you make sure that new members actually understand the meaning of each signal? Don't overthink this. You have to incorporate them into your unit's standard operating procedures, also known as your SOP. Most universities have their own standard operating procedures. We allow our MS3s to create their own new ones every year. It's kind of a forcing function for them to think them out and then train the rest of the companies on what those are for the year. It also kind of forces people to use their agility, mental agility, in learning new ones each year as well. And how do you ensure each member of the team actually understands the purpose? Well, we plan for their use and we rehearse, we practice them, we use them in our rehearsals so that when the time comes that they're actually needed to be followed, people understand how to follow them. Now we're just going to finish off here with some of the basic hand and arm signals that you'll likely see. You've got there on the left, assemble or rally. Again, as I said at the beginning of the lesson, your university might have a different SOP. They might use different hand and arm signals for the captions there on the bottom. Make sure that you're following what your university does. But these are the basic ones that you would find in any type of likely Ranger handbook or some sort of basic Army hand and arm signal lesson. So you've got there, again on the left, assemble or rally. In the middle, join me, follow me, come to me. There on the right, increase your speed, which means run or move quicker. And a couple more that you might see, that one there on the left, disperse, moving that arm straight across and out. You've got wedge formation, which is usually seen in two different ways, there with the arm straight back and out, and or using just your hand to show wedge formation. Column formation can be shown two different ways. There is a pretty universal hand and arm signal for gas, 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 which is also any type of sea burn or chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear attack. And then you've got another one there, map check, contact left, contact right. That's pretty common sense. We use the left hand and or the right hand and arm to signal contact left, contact right, and point to the direction of where that contact is coming from. And take cover or get low, take a knee. And we've got enemy in sight, pointing the weapon towards the enemy and then pointing where you see them, I see them, enemy in sight. So in closing, we quickly went through, we identified our two types of patrols, right? We've got our recon and our combat, plus the different elements that follow under those. We've identified the 5 principles of patrolling, talked about why principles are so important, and then we've talked about employing the basic hand and arm signals. As I always say towards the end of mine, I encourage you to get out, practice these, get a hold of your university or battalion or company's SOPs, talk to your MS3s and MS4s, find out what the norm and expectation is for your hand and arm signals. Make sure you're actually following what your university follows. And as always, if you have any questions on any of this, first ask your ROTC instructor. Otherwise, go find an MS4 who's a subject matter expert, find a high-speed MS3, and if you still can't get your questions answered, feel free to reach out to me at silver.beatty@mso.umt.edu, and I will do my best to answer those for you. Thank you.